It was an ordinary day in the quiet reaches of the galaxy, far from the bustling trade routes and the shining capitals of the known civilizations. A small, unassuming planet called Zephyr Prime lived under the shadow of its peaceful skies. The Zephyri, an intelligent and peaceful species, had no enemies. At least, that was what they thought. Their technology was advanced, their culture rich, and their world, though fragile, had flourished for centuries. Then came the Vracs. No one knew where the Vracs came from. They appeared suddenly, as if from the void itself, a race of monstrous warriors with cold, unfeeling eyes and weapons that could tear through entire cities in a single blast. They were predators, and the Zephyri were their prey. For weeks, the Zephyri fought back with everything they had. They deployed their most advanced ships, their most skilled soldiers, and even used the planet's natural resources in desperate attempts to slow the Vracs' advance. But the Vracs were relentless. Every attempt to resist only ended in more destruction, more casualties. The Zephyri were growing weak, their defenses failing, and their hopes slipping away. As the last of their strongholds fell, the leaders of the Zephyri made a final decision. They would send out a call for help. It was a desperate move, but it was their only chance. They activated the oldest, most powerful distress beacon on Zephyr Prime, a beacon capable of broadcasting across the galaxy, reaching even the farthest stars. The message was simple but filled with the weight of their desperation. To anyone who hears this, we are the Zephyri. Our world is under attack. The Vracs are unstoppable. We need help. The signal shot out into the vastness of space, hoping against all odds that someone, anyone, might answer. Across the galaxy, the message traveled. It crossed the cold emptiness between star systems, passed through asteroid fields and nebulae, and finally reached a place few had ever heard of: the Deathworlder fleet. The Deathworlders were not known for their kindness or their diplomacy. They were not part of the great galactic alliances that dominated the galaxy's politics. They came from worlds that could kill an unprepared traveler in seconds, worlds that were dangerous, hostile, and unforgiving. Their people were survivors, shaped by the harshest environments known to any species. They were strong, tough, and often feared by other races, but they also had something that no other species in the galaxy could match: an unshakable will to fight, to protect, and to win. The SOS that reached the Deathworlder fleet did not fall on deaf ears. The message was clear. The Vracs were a threat like none other, and the Zephyri were on the brink of extinction. It was an opportunity no Deathworlder could ignore. The fleet's commander, General Kalen, a grizzled human veteran with countless battles under his belt, looked at the signal and felt the call to action stir within him. It was time to respond. The Deathworlders would come, and when they did, the Vracs would learn that there was more to fear in the galaxy than just their own kind. The Deathworlder fleet wasn't like other fleets in the galaxy. While the great galactic powers sent fleets of sleek, efficient warships, the Deathworlders preferred a different kind of strength, one built on survival, adaptation, and pure, brutal force. The Deathworlders didn't just fight wars. They survived worlds where life itself fought against them. Their home planets were nothing like the peaceful worlds of the Zephyri. They were planets where only the strongest survived. General Kalen, the commander of the fleet, had seen it all. He had fought on planets where the air was toxic, where predators the size of mountains hunted every living thing. He had led campaigns in jungles that could kill a soldier within minutes, in deserts where the heat would melt steel, and in freezing tundras where a single wrong step could send you into a frozen grave. These experiences had shaped him into a leader who knew what it meant to fight for survival and to win. The Deathworlder fleet was made up of several races, each from a different, dangerous world. Humans, with their adaptability and cunning, led the charge. Then there were the Keroth, a giant, reptilian species from a world of constant volcanic eruptions. Their scales were as hard as stone, and their strength was unmatched. The Axari, a race of insectoid warriors, were born in the acid swamps of their homeworld. Their sharp senses and ability to blend into the environment made them perfect for ambush tactics. And finally, the HFY, a race of amphibious beings who could survive in the most hostile of oceans, able to think and move with incredible speed in both water and on land. When the SOS from Zephyr Prime reached them, it didn't take long for the Deathworlders to act. The fleet's communication system hummed to life, and a hologram of General Callan appeared before the assembled leaders of the various Deathworlder races. The message was brief but to the point. The Scifi are on the verge of extinction. Callan's voice boomed across the war room. We've fought wars like this before, and we will fight again. The Vraks are a threat, and we will answer this call. The galaxy will know that no one is beyond our reach. There was no hesitation. The fleet's leaders agreed without question. The Deathworlders didn't need to ask if it was worth the risk. They knew what it meant to fight for something more than themselves. It was about proving that no enemy was too powerful, no odds too impossible. The fleet mobilized quickly. Massive warships, capable of surviving the harshest environments, began to power up their engines. The shipyards hummed with activity as battle fleets of every shape and size were prepared for the journey. The Deathworlders were not known for their patience, and the idea of leaving the Scifi to face the Vraks alone was unthinkable. As the fleet assembled, the various races prepared themselves in their own ways. The Karoth sharpened their claws and scaled their armor. The Exari honed their senses and practiced their silent strikes. The HFY conducted underwater drills, preparing for any situation. And humans, they just focused on what needed to be done, getting to Zephyr Prime, no matter the cost. The Deathworlder fleet was ready. The Vraks had made a mistake by attacking the Scifi. Soon, they would learn that the Deathworlders were a force like no other, a force that would not be stopped. The Deathworlder fleet had only one speed, full throttle. As their ships prepared to leave their secret base in the farthest corner of the galaxy, there was no time to waste. The call had been answered, and the Deathworlders moved with the kind of precision that only comes from years of surviving the deadliest environments in the galaxy. They didn't need to discuss it any further. There was no debate. This was their mission. They would not fail. General Callan stood at the command center of the flagship, the Invincible, a massive vessel that could endure the heat of 1,000 suns. His eyes scanned the vast fleet, more than 50 ships of all sizes, each one a symbol of a race forged through survival on the harshest planets. From towering Karoth warships to sleek, quick human battle cruisers, each ship was a testament to the willpower and strength of its crew. The fleet's communications officer, a tall, sharp-eyed human named Lieutenant Nora, called out, breaking the silence. "General Callan, we've received the first reports from our scouts," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of excitement. "The Vraks fleet is moving toward Zephyr Prime. They're massive, but our ships are already on course to intercept." Callan nodded, his face hardening. "Good. Let's make sure they know what happens when you mess with the wrong species." He turned to address the fleet's commanders. "Listen up. The Scifi are counting on us. This is not just about a fight. It's about sending a message. The Vraks will learn that there are races in this galaxy they cannot defeat. Today, we show them why the Deathworlder fleet is the galaxy's greatest force." The room went silent. The Deathworlders were known for many things: strength, courage, and determination. But above all, they were known for their pride. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to dominate. This was their moment to prove that no enemy, no matter how powerful, was beyond their reach. "Get ready for the jump to Zephyr Prime," Callan ordered. The hum of the engines vibrated through the ship as the fleet began its final approach. On every ship, soldiers suited up in their battle gear, checking weapons, preparing their vehicles, and making sure their teams were ready for whatever was ahead. The Deathworlders never went into battle unprepared, and this time was no different. The Karoth warriors flexed their massive claws, testing their strength in the ship's gravity chamber. The Xeri insectoids, who could scale walls and move through the shadows like ghosts, checked their silent blasters, their compound eyes gleaming with focus. The Dwai-Kari amphibians sharpened their blades and prepared for both underwater and ground combat, knowing they might need to fight in any environment. Humans, quick, adaptable, and always ready for anything, gathered in small groups, sharing quick plans and strategies. They had been fighting alongside the other Deathworlders for years, and they knew what was at stake. They were fighters at heart, and they would fight until the very end. As the fleet moved closer to the Zephyr system, Kalen stood in front of a giant holographic map, plotting the final approach. His mind was sharp, every detail carefully considered. The Vrax would be waiting. They wouldn't expect the Deathworlders, but that would be their mistake. "Prepare for battle," Kalen ordered, his voice steady and filled with the weight of a lifetime spent on the front lines. "We've got a planet to save." The Deathworlder fleet, with all its raw power, was ready. The Vrax had made a dangerous enemy, and the time for mercy had long passed. The Deathworlder fleet dropped out of hyperspace with terrifying precision. The giant warships and sleek battle cruisers appeared in orbit above Zephyr Prime, their engines glowing with power as they surrounded the planet like a storm closing in on its prey. The Scifi had never seen anything like it. Massive ships that looked like they had been forged from the heart of a star, with weapons capable of turning an entire fleet to dust. They were used to seeing advanced fleets, but nothing compared to the Deathworlders. From the surface of Zephyr Prime, the skies filled with the thunderous roar of the Deathworlder ships as they hovered above the atmosphere. The Scifi watched in awe, unsure of what to expect. The creatures who came to their aid were not like the peaceful diplomats they were used to. These were warriors, forged in the fires of battle, and they had come to save them from the Vrax. General Kalen stood at the helm of the Invincible, his eyes scanning the planet below. The Scifi had been through so much destruction, so much loss, and now they were looking to the Deathworlders for a miracle. Kalen could feel the weight of their hopes pressing down on him, but he didn't let it shake him. He had led his fleet through countless battles. This would be no different. A message came through from the Scifi leadership, and Kalen's face hardened as he listened. "We are grateful for your arrival, General Kalen," the leader of the Scifi, an elder named Vemure, said. "But the Vrax are unlike anything we've ever faced. We cannot guarantee your safety. You are putting yourselves at great risk." Kalen's voice came back strong, without hesitation. "If there's one thing we know, it's how to fight back. We'll get you through this." His confidence was unshakable. The Vrax would learn that the Deathworlders were not a force to be underestimated. The Scifi hesitated at first, unsure of how to interact with the strange new allies. Their race was one of peace, of intelligence and understanding. But in the presence of the Deathworlders, who carried the weight of countless battles on their shoulders, they felt a strange sense of safety. The warriors from beyond the stars spoke little, but their presence was enough to reassure the Scifi. It was clear that they had come not just to help, but to fight with everything they had. General Kalen gave the order. The Deathworlder fleet moved into position, and the first wave of soldiers began to deploy. The ships released dropships that descended toward Zephyr Prime's surface, each carrying squads of Deathworlder soldiers ready for combat. The atmosphere was thick with tension. This was their first real engagement with the Vrax, and there was no room for mistakes. The Scifi watched from their cities as the Deathworlders touched down, their ships landing in massive craters, and their warriors disembarking with weapons ready. The Keroth warriors let out a roar that echoed across the planet, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The Xeri moved silently through the underbrush, preparing for stealth attacks. The humans and Dwai-Kari began strategizing their moves, determined to make every step count. The time for peace was over. The battle for Zephyr Prime had begun. The ground shook as the first wave of Deathworlder troops made contact with the soil of Zephyr Prime. The air was thick with tension and the scent of battle. General Kalen, standing at the command center aboard the Invincible, watched as his fleet began its coordinated attack on the Vrax forces. The enemy was already waiting, their warships hovering above the planet, ready to rain destruction on the Scifi. But the Deathworlders were not about to let that happen. The Deathworlder fleet launched a barrage of energy blasts, striking the Vrax ships with precision. The Vrax retaliated, their own weapons tearing into the atmosphere with explosive force. The battle was fierce and brutal, but the Deathworlders were unrelenting. Each race in the fleet brought their own strengths to the fight. On the surface, the Keroth warriors led the charge. Their massive forms, covered in thick, armored scales, charged through the Vrax's defensive lines like unstoppable tanks. With every step, they crushed anything in their path. Their claws, sharp as blades, tore through Vrax soldiers with terrifying ease. They were the tip of the spear, the hammer that broke through the enemy's defenses. Behind them, the Exari moved like shadows. Their insectoid bodies allowed them to scale trees and walls with ease, positioning themselves in the perfect spots to strike. With their silent weapons, they picked off Vrax soldiers from the shadows, creating chaos and confusion among the enemy ranks. The Vrax didn't know where the attacks were coming from, and that uncertainty was enough to throw them off balance. The Dwaikari amphibians, with their lightning-fast reflexes and aquatic skills, fought in the water and on land. Their sleek bodies allowed them to navigate the environment with ease, and they used their natural abilities to surprise the Vrax at every turn. Their underwater strikes, quick and deadly, left the enemy soldiers scrambling to defend themselves in a world they didn't understand. Meanwhile, the humans, quick, strategic, and fiercely determined, moved in coordinated squads. They took control of the most critical locations, laying traps and setting up ambushes. They didn't need brute force like the Keroth or stealth like the Exari. They fought with cunning, using their knowledge of tactics to outsmart the Vrax at every turn. The Vrax, despite their advanced technology, were not prepared for this kind of battle. They had underestimated the Deathworlders, thinking their sheer firepower would be enough to crush any resistance. But the Deathworlders weren't like other armies. They didn't fight for glory or conquest. They fought to survive. And for the Deathworlders, there was no such thing as surrender. As the battle raged on, the Vrax began to realize they were losing. Their soldiers, once so confident, began to fall back, disorganized and panicked. The Deathworlders were too relentless, too powerful. They had fought battles on worlds far more dangerous than this, and they would not let a single enemy stand in their way. General Kaelin's voice crackled through the comms. "Push forward. We're not stopping until Zephyr Prime is safe." The Deathworlders pressed on, undeterred by the damage or the losses. This was their fight now, and they would fight until the very last Vrax was driven from the planet. Zephyr Prime was theirs to defend. The battle on Zephyr Prime had raged for hours. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning wreckage. Bodies, both Vrax and Zephyri, littered the battlefield, while the ground shook with every blast of energy. The Deathworlder fleet had done what they always did best: fight. They were pushing the Vrax back, but they weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for survival, and that meant they had to outsmart the enemy at every turn. General Kaelin stood on the bridge of the Invincible, his eyes glued to the battlefield below. His fleet had successfully neutralized most of the Vrax ships in orbit, but the ground battle was still far from won. The Vrax were fierce, and they fought with an animalistic rage. They had one goal: to destroy everything in their path. But they hadn't counted on the Deathworlders. Kaelin's comms officer, Lieutenant Nora, glanced up from her station. "General, we're getting reports from the surface. The Vrax are starting to regroup. They're pulling their forces back to the northern sector of the planet." Kaelin's jaw tightened. They're making their last stand. "Prepare the second wave." He turned to the tactical officer, a sharp-eyed human named Captain Ellis. "We need to push them hard, Captain. No mercy." Captain Ellis nodded. "Understood, General." The Karoth will lead the charge again. We'll hit them from all sides. The Karoth warriors, their enormous forms nearly unstoppable, had been the backbone of the Deathworlder assault. But now, they would be the spearhead. The Vraks were making their final push, but the Deathworlders weren't about to give them the chance. On the surface, the battle was nearing its peak. The Karoth charged forward once more, their massive claws swinging as they tore through the remaining Vrak soldiers. With every step, the Vrak's lines broke apart, unable to withstand the sheer force of the Deathworlder onslaught. But the Vraks were not without their own savagery. They fought with everything they had, desperate to push the Deathworlders back. Vrak's war machines, massive, mechanical beasts, ramped up their firepower, unleashing hell on the Deathworlder forces. The skies above the battlefield filled with flashes of bright energy as the two sides clashed. The Exari, who had been lurking in the shadows, now struck in full force. With their uncanny ability to blend into their environment, they had taken up positions high in the trees and in the ruins of Zephyr Prime's cities. Their blasters fired in quick succession, cutting down Vrak soldiers with deadly precision. The Vraks had no chance to react before the Exari disappeared back into the jungle. The HFY amphibians launched from the waters, using their speed and agility to flank the Vraks' rear. They had the advantage in these environments, and their lightning-fast movements caught the Vraks off guard, allowing the Deathworlders to close in on their enemies from all sides. Meanwhile, the humans, ever adaptable, took control of the battlefield's technology. They hacked into the Vraks' communications, causing chaos within their ranks. The Deathworlders were everywhere now, and the Vraks had no choice but to fight on multiple fronts. It was too much. General Kalen, watching from above, knew the end was near. "Hold the line," he commanded. "The Vraks will break. We just have to finish the job." It wasn't over yet, but the Deathworlders could feel it. The tide was turning. The Vraks were retreating, no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. Soon, Zephyr Prime would be free. The Vraks were retreating, but they weren't giving up without a fight. General Kalen could see the desperation in their movements, their soldiers scattering in an attempt to regroup in the northern sector. But it didn't matter. The Deathworlders were closing in, and the Vraks had no idea what they were about to face. Kalen gave the order to launch the final offensive. The ground forces were in position, and the ships in orbit were prepared to bombard any escape routes the Vraks might try to take. The Deathworlders had already destroyed most of the Vraks' war machines, and the remaining ones were scattered, confused, and weak. Now, it was time to finish this once and for all. "We pushed them into a corner," Kalen said, his voice steady. "We end this now." The Karoth warriors, their battle cries echoing through the planet's jungles, moved forward in a full charge. Their massive forms stomped across the battlefield, each step shaking the ground beneath them. Their claws ripped through Vrak's defenses, tearing through whatever resistance was left. The Vraks tried to fight back, but the Karoth were unstoppable. They were a force of nature, brutal, relentless, and terrifying. Behind the Karoth, the Exari took up their positions. The insectoid warriors, quick as lightning, sprinted through the wreckage and ruins, their blasters cutting down Vrak soldiers one by one. They didn't give the enemy a chance to fight back. Every Vrak soldier who moved was met with the cold precision of the Exari's silent strikes. The Vaikari, who had spent the battle striking from the water, now took to the land with even greater speed. They surged forward in a wave, using their natural agility to leap over obstacles and dodge enemy fire. They moved so fast, the Vraks could barely react, their ranks breaking apart in chaos. The amphibians took control of key areas, cutting off the Vraks' escape routes and forcing them into the open. The humans, ever adaptable, had taken full control of the battlefield's technology. They hacked into the remaining Vrak systems, jamming their communications and making it impossible for them to coordinate any kind of defense. They set up traps and ambushes, using the terrain to their advantage. Each movement, each strategy was carefully planned, and it all led to this moment. The Vraks had nowhere to run. General Kaelin's voice came over the comms again, a simple command. Close in. The Deathworlder forces began to tighten their grip on the Vraks' position. The remaining Vrak soldiers fought with desperation, but they were overwhelmed. The Deathworlders knew how to handle this, how to break their enemies down piece by piece. The Vraks were powerful, yes, but they weren't prepared for the fury of the Deathworlders. They didn't know what it meant to face such a relentless, unstoppable force. In the distance, Kaelin could see the last of the Vraks warships trying to flee into the atmosphere. He knew that if they escaped, they could regroup, launch a counterattack. He couldn't let that happen. He turned to his fleet's captain. Launch everything we've got. The Vraks end here. The final assault was brutal. The Deathworlder ships rained fire down on the remaining Vraks vessels, disintegrating them in moments. As the last Vraks warship was destroyed, the ground forces made their final push. There was no more retreat, no more hope for the enemy. The battle was over. The Vraks had been defeated. Zephyr Prime was safe. The battlefield was silent now, the once thriving forests and cities of Zephyr Prime lying in ruins. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. The Vraks had been driven off, their war machines shattered, and their soldiers scattered. But in the wake of their retreat, the Deathworlders knew that this victory had come at a price. General Kaelin stood at the edge of the ruined city, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Keroth warriors were gathering their fallen comrades, their massive forms silent as they paid respect to their dead. The Exeri and Waikari were tending to their injured, their precise movements helping to stabilize those who had been wounded in the fight. Humans were helping wherever they could, offering medical aid and organizing survivors. The Deathworlders didn't just fight together, they healed together. The Zephyri were emerging from their shelters, cautiously at first, unsure of what to expect. They had watched as the Deathworlders fought with incredible strength, but they had not yet seen their compassion. The Zephyri had never been a violent species. They had always relied on their intelligence and diplomacy to survive. But now they saw the Deathworlders for what they truly were, not just warriors, but protectors. Vemira, the leader of the Zephyri, approached Kaelin. Her expression was one of gratitude mixed with awe. She had seen her people face near extinction at the hands of the Vraks, and now they were alive because of the Deathworlders. She bowed her head respectfully. General Kaelin, Vemira said softly, her voice filled with emotion. You saved us. The Vraks would have destroyed us all, but you showed us that there is strength beyond what we imagined. Your people are not just warriors. You are a family. Kaelin gave her a nod, his expression stoic, but his eyes betraying a hint of pride. We fight together. That's what makes us strong. And we'll continue to fight, as long as there's a need. The Zephyri looked to their rescuers with newfound respect. In the days that followed, they would rebuild their cities and their lives, but they would never forget the Deathworlders. The bond that had been forged on the battlefield would last long after the war was over. As the Deathworlder fleet began to prepare for its return to the stars, Kaelin stood beside Vemira one last time. The battle had been won, but the future remained uncertain. The Vraks had been pushed back, but they would regroup. The Deathworlders knew this wasn't the last time they would face such enemies. The galaxy is full of dangers, Kaelin said, but as long as we stand together, no one can threaten our way of life. Vemira nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. We will never forget what you did for us, General Kaelin. Our people will always remember that it was the Deathworlders who saved us. With that, the Deathworlders boarded their ships and lifted off, leaving Zephyr Prime behind. The fight was over for now, but they knew they would always be ready. For the Deathworlders, peace was never permanent. There was always another battle waiting in the stars. Months had passed since the Vraks had been driven off Zephyr Prime, and the planet was slowly rebuilding. The Zephyri had started to regain their strength, with their cities being rebuilt and their people returning to their daily lives. But the memory of the Deathworlder's arrival and the battle they fought to protect the Scifi was fresh in their minds. General Kalen, now back aboard the Invincible, looked out from the observation deck, his gaze focused on the stars beyond. The battle was over, but there were always new threats lurking in the galaxy. He knew that his fleet couldn't rest for long. There were more enemies to face, more worlds to protect. Captain Ellis approached Kalen, his boots clanging against the metal floor as he walked. "General, we've received a transmission from the Scifi. They're holding a ceremony in honor of the Deathworlder's victory." Kalen turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. "A ceremony?" Ellis nodded. "They want to thank us. They want to show their people that they won't forget what we did for them." Kalen paused, his eyes lingering on the stars for a moment. He had never been one for ceremonies, but he knew this wasn't just for the Deathworlders. It was for the Scifi too, a way for them to heal and move forward. He sighed and nodded. "All right. Set course for Zephyr Prime. Let's see what they have in mind." The Invincible set a course for Zephyr Prime, and soon the Deathworlder fleet was back in orbit above the planet. The Scifi had prepared a grand ceremony in the planet's capital city. Thousands of Scifi gathered in the central square, their faces full of gratitude and admiration. The once quiet and peaceful planet had been forever changed by the events that had unfolded. But now, it was a place of hope. As Kalen and his officers disembarked, they were met by Vemera and other leaders of the Scifi. The Scifi bowed their heads respectfully, acknowledging the Deathworlder's role in saving their people. "We will never forget what you did for us," Vemera said, her voice filled with emotion. "Because of you, our world lives on." Kalen nodded in return. "We didn't do this for thanks. We did it because it was the right thing to do. And we'll always be here to help you, should you need us." The ceremony began with a peaceful moment of silence, a tribute to those who had fallen in the battle. Then, the Scifi presented the Deathworlders with a gift, a symbolic piece of Scifi crystal, a representation of their strength and resilience. It glowed with a soft light, a symbol of the bond that had been forged between their people. As Kalen held the crystal in his hand, he felt a sense of pride, not just for the victory they had achieved, but for the connection they had made with the Scifi. This was more than just a military alliance. It was the beginning of something new. "This is just the start," Kalen thought to himself. "A new chapter in the history of the Deathworlders and the galaxy." The Deathworlders' legacy had been sealed that day, not just as warriors, but as protectors. They had shown the galaxy that strength wasn't only about power, it was about standing together, no matter the cost. And Kalen knew that, no matter what came next, they would always fight for those who couldn't protect themselves. The stars ahead were full of possibilities, and the Deathworlders were ready to face whatever lay beyond.